Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Alexis and today I'm going to be sharing the 8 books that I read for January 2022. So let's get started. Now the first book I'm going to be talking about is Tightrope by Amanda Quick. Now this is part of one of her series, but this is the only one I've read. This is one of the middle books, so if you do plan on trying out the series, I do not recommend starting here because I personally would have chosen to start at the beginning, but after reading this, I'm not even sure I want to try out the rest of the series. So, this is a historical romance. It's more so around the late 1920s, early 1930s. This is about the romance between Matthias and Amalie. Now, Amalie is a former trapeze artist, but then she decides to start a bed and breakfast, and when one of her first guests, I believe her first guest, in fact, is murdered during a performance for something else involving a robot and supposed artificial intelligence, she ends up being caught up by it, and Matthias is brought in to investigate. I thought this was far too slow. Uh, the development was very poor. The interactions between Matthias and Amalie were far in between. I would also say that there was too much attention drawn to the side characters, especially with Amalie's former co worker, as well as the actual um, villain of the story. So, yeah, that was very frustrating for me. I had to force myself to finish. As you can see, there's not that many tabs, and even then, those were fleeting. Those moments were fleeting that I actually enjoyed. So, yes, I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. Some of my favorite moments, I guess, if you can call them that, would be when Matthias was acknowledging uh, Amalie's appearance in a dressed up, outfit for when they were going to investigate at and question people at a local club. I also enjoyed the conservatory moments. Again, it was very, very few and far in between. There's also some, criminal activity. So there's a scene involving a grenade. I thought that was pretty interesting. And, there was a moment between Willa and Jasper, but then that turned out to be pointless because, again, if you do decide to read this book, their acknowledgement or, fleeting moment of, attraction between Willa and Jasper was just pointless. So, yeah, 2 out of 5 stars. Would not recommend. Don't plan on reading the other books in the series. So after Tightrope, I went into a digital book, The Duke Who Knew Too Much. I read this on Kindle, and this is written in third person. It's my first book by Grace Calloway. It features a historical romance. This is between a spinster and a rake. There are elements of crime and mystery involved, murder even, family dynamics in question, childhood abuse and neglect, along with domestic abuse. This is a 12-year age gap, so I thought that was pretty sweet. And I'll just go over the synopsis I put together just to give an idea of what it's about. Now, at a ball, Emma caught Alaric in the middle of a lover's tryst, though to her virgin eyes, she assumed he was causing harm. Although her accusations were temporarily suspended when Alaric's found with his dead mistress poisoned, Emma couldn't help but report him to authorities. So, to convince her of his innocence, Alaric took her to observe a body house, and so their interactions continue from there. So I thought it was interesting. Emma was of the working class. This is also difference in class story. So Emma was the second eldest of several children for working class family, and she was often taking care of her younger siblings and being the homemaker. She's a spinster entering society, and she was unaware of the society norms of the upper class. Whereas Alaric, on his end, he is a duke at that point and a widower. He was considered a cold-hearted rake to many people within upper class, And in truth, he was neglected and abused as a child, having to overcome obstacles alone. He did not have healthy family relations growing up, so that's on his part. Some of my favorite moments include, them running into each other at the ball, or anytime Emma was making assumptions and then Alaric would have to prove her wrong. Again, you'd have to read this. It was pretty entertaining. There's also a moment of, having to go through a agreement and courtship briefly, because there was this immediate traction, and Alaric has to convince Emma to do so. There are hints at other relationships that uh, are within the same world and within the series, but I suspect they will be the type of books that you can read as standalones. But this one, again, is at the beginning, so I just started there. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, partially because I felt that the side character of Lily should have played a part more, because, she's somewhat involved in the, you know, mystery aspect, but she isn't present. We don't get to hear her side or her perspective on things that happen. Not that her perspective needs to be fully included, but to have Alaric or Emma or both of them interact, because they did interview some people in regards to the mystery that was going on. So, yes, 4 out of 5 stars for this one. The next book I read is Through the Storm by Beverly Jenkins, and this is her first book in the Levesque series. I realized after reading that this is about Raymond, who was a side character or supporting character in Indigo, which is about his best friend and his heroine. But this one is between Raymond and Sable Fontaine. Now, Sable, she is a former slave turned free, and she was kind of a runaway, whereas Levesque, he was born free and a Union soldier. Now, this is written in third person. This is, of course, historical romance, second chance romance, somewhat marriage of convenience. This does take place around the end of the Civil War and post Civil War. Of course, it includes bigotry, as can be expected with books taking place around that time. There are elements of, death and suicide, sickly children, and treachery. Again, I thought this was pretty interesting, but not my favorite. So it's like somewhat middle ground for me. I could see myself continuing the series. In fact, I plan to do so. I believe there are 3 sequels after this. But essentially, born a slave and recently sold, Sable flees from her plantation after the death of her aunt, and she crosses paths with Araminta. So, for those of you who know, historically, Araminta is another name for Harriet Tubman, so involving the Underground Railroad a little bit and freeing of slaves. That's more so the first quarter of the story, but it's not as interwoven as I suspected it would be. Together, they return to the Union soldiers, and one of them happens to be Major Raymond Levesque. And during their time together at the refuge camp, they grow mutually affectionate. But when the camp is attacked, Sable flees again, not wanting to return to slave life. And in doing so, she betrays Raymond in some way. Raymond, on his end, he is left injured, and he assumes that Sable did the worst that she could do, when in fact she was just trying to save herself at that moment. Months later, they meet again in New Orleans, and Raymond enlists his mother's help him find a bride. But by doing so, Sable ends up being selected, and this is a rekindling between them. So some of my favorite parts include, riding on horseback together. Then there's also moments of, Ray helping Sable find work and, get absorbed into or adjust to the camp life. So there are also elements with Ryan, who is Sable's brother, and he is biracial, whereas Sable is fully black and Ryan is her half brother. There are some choices he makes in this one that are resolved in the Forbidden Story, which is what I read first. But this is about his sister, so I thought that was interesting. Both main characters in this story have siblings and friends who are in other books. So I thought that was an interesting way to note. But this takes place before Forbidden. However, I do not think they need to be read together. Although, if you read this first and then go into Ryan's story, you get a better idea of the evolution and what they went through growing up. So there are also moments where Raymond and his brothers, he has several brothers who not all of them have their own stories, but a couple of them do. And they all at one point were uh, hoping to marry Sable, but of course, Raymond is the one selected, because he enlists his mother's help, and by doing so, she picks Sable. There's also a moment with, children, or several moments with children, and just the affection that they showed toward them was very adorable. I will also say that, you know, there are some side stories or subplots. So in the camp, they had a special day every month during which, the campers would be able to marry because at the time, slaves weren't allowed to do so. And then once they were free, they decided to do so at this camp and have an actual ceremony and do it legally or as legal as they could at the time because, again, this is still Civil War era. And there's this moment between a side character and another side character where he chooses to marry a woman whose children aren't his, just because he wants to be able to provide for her and vice versa. So I thought that was a cute moment. But, anyways, this book, again, 4 to 5 stars. I would recommend starting with this if you're going to go into Forbidden, but go in with an open mind. Otherwise, if you don't think you can do that, read Forbidden first and then go back to this one because they do end up finding each other again. Although in this story, we weren't sure if we were going to see Ryan again. So, yeah, but there you have it. Now, this next book, I'm only going to share some of the tropes because I feel like if I tell them all, it's going to spoil the story. And the way it was revealed to me, I went in blind, right? So this was a pleasant surprise. I enjoyed the banter and the development of their relationship. I enjoyed the caregiving and, idea of class difference and possible identity related. There are letters involved. So very, very sweet story. And that is Yours Until Dawn by Teresa Modieros. This is my first book by this author. It does include a beautiful step back. And this is between Samantha and Gabriel. Now, Samantha, she was hired to be the nursemaid for Gabriel, and Gabriel was injured in war. He became blind, and he was scorned by his lover, Cicely. So he is, trying to work his way to get over her. And Samantha, on her end, she is caregiving and trying to, help him find reason to continue his life, even though he's blind. So I thought that was very a sweet element in here. Their development was, very beautiful. I mean, because Gabriel's blind, obviously he had to use his other senses of touch and smell, and there were just moments where he literally could sniff Samantha out, and I thought it was just funny, but also really cute and sensual at times. But sometimes it was just funny, especially their first meeting or their assumed first meeting. Take that as you will, because things, but I enjoyed this element here because there's, kind of the idea of it being a crying wolf situation, a Beauty and the Beast situation, another type of situation, but I'm not going to say. So they definitely have clashing moments in here, but then when Gabriel injures himself, Samantha takes care of him. And there are also times when she's trying to help him get situated with dinner. There's a disaster and then the makeup dinner, and it was just really cute in here. And I'm shook. I'm really shook by the plots in here. There, like I said, there's the element of fairy tale and it being inspired by situations, as a veteran and having to go on afterwards, even, recalling those moments of distress and having to push through that in daily life, as well as, finding your people, even if your own family won't help you in your time of need. So that's a situation on his end. Yes, pleasantly surprised. I will also say that towards the end, there is a moment when I felt like Gabriel shouldn't have, healed the way that he did. But then at the same time, if he didn't, he wouldn't have been able to find Samantha. So, or his Samantha. So, with that being said, I still gave this 5 stars because the entire time I could not put this down. I could not stop reading. I literally read through it and it was perfect. And with that being said, also, by the time I finished this book, I thought about rereading it in a row. I didn't do that, but I was seriously considering it because I was thinking about it for quite a few days. Maybe 3 days I was on pause before I went into my next book. But it's all because of how everything folded out in here, and I wanted to start again just to see where the clues are because it was that intriguing. So there's somewhat a mystery element in here, but like I said, for the most part, it's a fairy tale esque type of story. And then there's, addressing the caregiving and the healing. It's just, I could gush on and on about this book. But I also don't want to overshare because, again, you just have to read it. So, yes, 5 out of 5 stars. Definitely plan on reading again. Not sure how soon, though, because I have other books to get to, but I definitely plan on reading this again, most likely this year. So, there you go. Now, the next book I read is Falling into Bed with a Duke. Now, this is my second time reading this book. I did read it last year in 2021, my physical copy, but this time around I decided to listen to the audiobook because I do have access to the sequels in the series. It's from the Hellions of Havisham series, and there are 3 books after this one that I know of. So I wanted to, refresh myself for the start, which is with this book. And it is written in third person. It's, of course, historical romance. There's this idea of secret identity, spinster and rake. There are elements of loss of loved ones and, sibling dynamics. So I can't say I was deeply affected by this book, but it's about Ash and Minerva, and they play with mystery. They develop a level of respect for each other throughout the book, and essentially, Minerva was on the verge of spinsterhood when she decided to go to a club for lovers to lose her virginity, and ladies wore masks to remain anonymous and protect their reputation, while men didn't because, they just have that privilege. Anyways, they met, she and Ash admired her for the form of her legs and her clothing, so he was attracted to her upon appearance, and it wasn't, because they knew each other and that he knew they knew each other, because her face is covered with a mask. So there's this mystery element and false identity or hidden identity, more so. Their chemistry is light. I wouldn't say it was simmering by any means. So Ash, he lost his parents when he was young and was raised with other boys on the Havisham estate. And they were, him and the other boys were later known as the Hellions of Havisham. He sought to rid his nightmares about, his parents' death using photography to capture beauty, whether that be models or scenery, sometimes a combination of the two. Nothing worked to help with those nightmares until he met Minerva under the guise of Lady V. You can guess what the V stands for. Yet she was hesitant to, do this type of photography and play with him due to, fortune hunters, and she didn't want Ash to be like the other men who had chased her in her life, more so for her money. Although Ash did need money, he needed her in his life more, and I thought that was a nice element towards the end. But I still left it at my original rating, which is 3 stars. There were cute moments, mystery behind the mask. That idea is nice. Ash being in awe of Minerva being able to uh, play cards and somewhat gamble. I also enjoyed the proposal, but I stand by, like I said, by my original rating because it was only okay. I sort of wish that the, you know, idea of getting over trauma for Ash was not so sudden because when he and Minerva finally get together, his nightmares go away. And I feel like that's not something that happens in real life. If it's significant trauma, whether it be from childhood or neglect or war related, they're not things that just get by. They're things that follow you throughout your life, but there are people around you who may help you move past it or push through it. So I kind of felt that was unnatural. And I do plan on reading the rest of the books, but right after this one, I did go into the next book, which is The Earl Takes All by Lorraine Heath, of course. And this is also third person. This is about Edward and Julia. Now, this one's also a historical romance. It's a forbidden love to a sibling's spouse. There's this idea of false identity, death of a loved one, and caregiving. Now, on a trip in Africa, Edward's Earl brother Albert asks Edward to take care of his wife and coming child with his dying breath. I quote, "Be me." When Edward returns, he declares that he is in fact Albert and that Edward, the spare, or himself, was the one who died. Julia helps with Edward's arrangements for a funeral, not knowing that it was truly her husband Albert who had died, so there's the identity switch for the twins. Although Edward didn't want to hurt Julia, he followed through with Albert's wishes, and I thought it was funny because Julia and Albert were already married, and she still didn't recognize her husband versus her husband's brother. So, how well do you really know them? In reality, it's easy to point out differences with twins, especially if you get to know them. So, I thought that was something that wouldn't really happen, but again, as it unfolded in the story, I thought it was, unfortunate how she found out, but also kind of on you not to notice because you were so hopeful. I mean, there's, the idea of blind love too, where a person or when a person chooses to see the person that they want to see or see the things that they want to see, value the green flags over the red flags, and she didn't pick up on red flags. So, kind of on her, but I digress. It was so an intriguing story. I kind of also admired the fact that once, obviously, she finds out it's truly Edward and not Albert, they were prepared to, maintain the lie. But then when they realized that, Albert's memory would be lost for, all that he was, and Edward wouldn't be acknowledged for all that he is, so they decide to break the arrangement, and they do eventually find a way to be together legally because according to, I want to say, English law, they aren't allowed to marry siblings, but they found a way. Of course, it's a happily ever after, to be expected. So I thought that was a nice play on the plot. Although I appreciated the brotherly bond, I do wish more memories of Albert were shared because, again, he dies within the first couple of pages, whereas he was present briefly in Falling into Bed with the Duke. So there you have it. This one I did give 4 stars. I enjoyed it more than I did the first book, but I still thought there were some elements left to be desired. So that's for, The Earl Takes All. Okay. Now, these books I've waited for because one of them was just released and I knew I wanted to read them back to back, but I didn't want to tempt myself by buying it, once each one was released. So I waited. I waited until the third book came out. And that would be, from the Twisted series by Anna Huang. So first, of course, I had to start with Twisted Games. I already read Twisted Love, which is the first book in the series, but this is the second one. This is between Rhines and Bridget. Now, this is a dual perspective contemporary romance story, forbidden between a royal princess and bodyguard. There are elements of it being somewhat a slow burn, in my opinion, because good chunk of the first half is, their development. And this is supposed to take place over years of knowing each other, maybe about 4 years in total for the whole book. But there are elements of blackmail in here, some childhood trauma and PTSD, or I should say complex PTSD. Now, Rhines was hired to be Bridget's bodyguard, but over the course of 4 years, they disagreed, they bantered, and they slowly fell in love before falling all at once. And despite Bridget being next in line for the throne and their forbidden relationship, Rhines did not stay away for long, or he just couldn't resist, right? And although they pushed for the sake of country, love prevailed, which again, another sweet moment. Aside from their sarcasm and banter, they shared a mutual understanding about loneliness, and by birth, they were put in difficult situations. So Rhines, on his end, he was raised briefly by a neglectful mother for the first, I want to say 10, maybe a little over 10 years of his life. And his father was never in the picture. Whereas Bridget, her mother died childbirth and her father died in an accident, but she had the companionship of her older brother, Nikolai, and was raised by her grandfather Edvard. I believe that's how you pronounce. But yes, and it's them, running the fictional country Eldoria, if I'm pronouncing it right. But again, you just have to read it to understand the full gist. And some of my favorite elements or moments in this book include, of course, the first meeting and immediate attraction. There's also a time when Rhines plans an indoor festival for Bridget, and that was really cute. They do go to Costa Rica. That's all I'm going to say about Costa Rica. You just, again, got to read it to understand what's going on. And then there are other moments in the gazebo, in the throne room. Then there's assistance from Alex in order to find something. So I thought that was a nice tie-in with Twisted Love. Alex is the hero from the first book, so him being featured in here was fun. I mean, all the other side characters, or most of the side characters from Twisted Love, are featured in here, but again, the series follows 4 girls and their relationships. So the first one was Ava and Alex. This one follows Bridget and Rhines, and then the next book I'll get into because that was the most recent release and that was the one I was waiting for. But I digress. This one still pleasantly and thoroughly enjoyed. I saw other booktubers and Instagrammers talk about it as well. It's often compared to The Princess Diaries 2, featuring Anne Hathaway and Julie Andrews. I will also say that, although it's compared to the relationship between Anne Hathaway and Chris Pine's character in that movie, for me, this resonates with Julie Andrews' character and Hector Elizondo's. Excuse me. He's Julie Andrews' character's bodyguard. So that's, in my interpretation, this is more so about Julie Andrews' character and her love interest in The Princess Bride, because this is, if they had gotten together when they were still young, whereas in that movie they are already, you know, in their winter years of life. So yeah, but still 5 out of 5 stars. Thoroughly enjoyed. This is an age gap as well, I will say that. But yes, it's very good. Very, very good. And the last one, the one I've been waiting for, which just released on January 27th, and that is Twisted Hate. This is the third book in the Twisted series, as I mentioned. This is about Josh Chen and Jules Ambrose. Now, Josh is the older brother of Ava from Twisted Love. So this follows her brother, and Jules is Ava's best friend. So this is a sister's best friend trope. This is obviously hate to love. This is an interracial romance. It was just everything I wanted. And I didn't realize, bro, I didn't realize how thick this book is. This is thick with 3 C's, thick. It has over 500 pages. And this is probably the thickest book I've ever read. Contemporary romance, of course. And I'm just going to say this one line, right? This has to be my favorite line from the book. And that's because the possibility of you is better than the reality of anyone else. Just I knew from book 1, as soon as Josh and Jules were mentioned and it was obvious that they hated each other. They hated each other for right reasons. I mean, they overheard each other talking crap, and they, would do little things to spite each other. Is just, but the development here is so cute. I mean, I could definitely see myself rereading this soon as well. The last and final book, Twisted Lies, which is supposed to be about Stella and her love interest Christian, who was first introduced in Twisted Games, but he does play more of a part in Twisted Hate, and then he'll obviously be the hero in Twisted Lies. So that's due to come out later this year. I'm not sure if the date has already been announced yet, but I suspect more so around the summer or fall time of the year. So, but yeah, this one, I already know it's my favorite in the series. I don't know if it will, take over Twisted Lies, but honestly, I doubt it because this one has been building up too. And plus, this also has, Josh and Alex, reconciling their relationship because in Twisted Love, they have a fallout for reasons and Alex's actions, but in this one they're resolved. It's just so good. I mean, some of my favorite parts I'll mention. They include, Josh taking care of Jules during her moments of need. There are the ski lessons. There are moments, of course, when they're sneaking around and their friends don't suspect it. Library. That's all I'm going to say. Library. The work picnic. Bookstore date. Yes, a bookstore date. It was just, the fact that Josh paid attention to what Jules was saying. He went to her mother's funeral with her in Ohio. I mean, he was supportive in so many ways. And when he realizes, Jules' situation, he gets frustrated. And rightly so. But the way he was mad, he made up for it. I mean, he groveled, he begged, he teared up in the end. And it was perfect. I tabbed this so much. I'm probably going to reread it soon, but it's definitely worth it. So worth it. I mean, the wait was worth it, but also it was painful. So I'm just looking forward to Twisted Lies, and I do hope they see more of the other characters or couples as well, because we get hints at, their happy endings from, Alex and Ava and Rhines and Bridget in this one. But, I'd like to see them all together again, although it was brief. Their meeting together was brief, but not when they're all coupled up. So I'm hoping for that in Twisted Lies, but again, we'll see. That concludes my video. Until next time, again, I'm Alexis. Bye!